At Christmas dinner, my mother looked me dead in the eye and said, "You are the most useless child we have." The words dropped into the room like a grenade. Forks froze in midair. My siblings shifted uncomfortably in their seats. My father cleared his throat, but said nothing. And for the first time in 32 years, I did not shrink back into silence. I stood up. My napkin slipped from my lap and landed on the floor. My voice was steady when I said, "If I'm so useless, then why is this family still standing on money you didn't earn?" That was the moment everything changed. My name is Emily Carter. I am 32 years old, and on paper, my life looks perfect. I live in New York City. I run a thriving design studio, and I have clients who trust me with multi-million-dollar projects. But none of that mattered to my family. In their eyes, I was still the forgotten middle child, the dreamer who colored outside the lines, the daughter who never measured up. Growing up, I was invisible in my own home. My older brother Adam was the golden boy. Tall, charming, naturally athletic, he could fumble his way through anything and still be praised. My sister Laura was the model daughter, the one who followed every tradition to the letter, the one who made our mother beam with pride. And then there was Chloe, the baby of the family, who was doted on so much that even her mistakes were called quirks. Me? I was the quiet one in the corner, sketching ideas in a notebook, hoping someone might notice. But no one did. My drawings were brushed aside as hobbies. My grades, straight A's, barely earned a nod compared to Adam's touchdowns. Laura's potluck casseroles were celebrated more loudly than the national competitions I won for design. Even Chloe's finger paintings made it onto the refrigerator, while my certificates sat in a drawer. My mother, Nancy, had a sharp tongue and sharper expectations. She grew up in a strict household and carried that rigidity like armor. Success, in her eyes, was measured by titles, traditions, and appearances. You married young, had children quickly, and built a life that looked neat from the outside. Anything else was rebellion. My father, Robert, was gentler, but passive. He avoided conflict the way some people avoid fire. Occasionally, he'd slip me a quiet word of encouragement, but always behind her back. He loved me, but he feared her more. By the time I reached adulthood, the pattern was set. Adam was untouchable. Laura was the pride. Chloe was the darling. And I was the afterthought. No matter how much I achieved, I was still painted as the child who chose the easy path, the one who didn't understand what real success looked like. My wins were minimized, my struggles magnified. Every holiday became another stage where my role was to smile politely, listen to endless stories about my siblings, and contribute without expecting recognition. And still, I kept showing up. A part of me hoped that maybe one Christmas, one birthday, one dinner, my mother would finally say she was proud. Instead, year after year, I left those gatherings smaller than when I arrived, carrying the weight of words unspoken. Until that night, until that Christmas dinner, when she finally voiced the insult I had felt all my life. "You are the most useless child we have." She thought those words would break me. She had no idea they would set me free. If you are watching this, drop a comment telling me where you are from. Hit subscribe and stay tuned to hear how I finally stood up for myself after years of being the forgotten daughter. To understand what happened at that Christmas dinner, you need to know what came before it. The years of being invisible, the years of being the child nobody wanted to brag about. I grew up in a suburb just outside New York City, in a 2-story colonial that looked picture perfect from the outside. But inside, the roles were assigned early. Adam, my older brother, was the star. He could do no wrong. He scored touchdowns on Friday nights, and my parents drove hours to sit in freezing bleachers just to watch him play. The living room mantel was lined with his trophies, shining proof that he was the one worth celebrating. Laura, my sister, followed close behind. She was the perfect daughter, at least in my mother's eyes. She married young, had children quickly, and settled into the life my mom worshipped. PTA meetings, dinner parties, volunteer work at the church. Every phone call from my mother seemed to begin with, "Laura just did this," or "Laura just accomplished that." It was endless. And then there was Chloe, the baby, 7 years younger than me. From the moment she was born, she was treated like royalty. Every mistake was forgiven as finding herself. She switched majors 3 times, dropped out once, maxed out a credit card, all brushed aside with excuses. She was cute. She was funny. She could never do wrong. And me? I was Emily, the one who sat in the middle of the family photos. Not too close to anyone. Not too far either. My grades were excellent. My art won competitions. But it didn't matter. To my family, I wasn't the golden boy, the perfect daughter, or the adorable baby. I was just there. When I tried to share my victories, my mother dismissed them. If I made the honor roll, she asked why I didn't win the scholarship another student got. If I won a design competition, she called it just drawing. Even my father, though kinder, never stood up for me. He'd say, "Now, Nancy," when she cut me down. But the second she turned her glare on him, he went silent. His love was quiet, hidden in small gestures, never strong enough to shield me from her words. The imbalance became obvious in life's biggest moments. When I graduated from college with honors, neither of my parents showed up. My mother had a club meeting. My father claimed a work emergency. I walked across that stage alone, scanning the crowd for faces that never appeared. That night, I watched classmates celebrating with their families while I sat on the edge of my bed, pretending it didn't matter. But it did. The older I got, the more the pattern repeated. I built a career, opened my own studio, and supported myself in one of the most expensive cities in America. But none of it counted in my family's eyes. They never visited my studio, never asked about my projects, never treated my success as real. To them, I was still the girl with a sketchbook, wasting her time. And then came the moment that burned into me forever. On the day of my high school graduation, I waited outside the gym with my cap in my hands, searching for my parents' car. Minutes turned into an hour. Everyone else left with flowers, with photos, with hugs. My parents, they never came. Later, I learned why. They had gone to a banquet for Adam's football team instead. That was the first time I realized I wasn't just forgotten. I was a choice. When I told my parents I wanted to study graphic design in college, my mother laughed. Not the kind of laugh that's warm or encouraging, but the sharp laugh that says, "You've already failed." "Graphic design," she said. "Emily, that's not a real career. It's just drawing pictures. Who's going to pay you to doodle?" Those words stuck like thorns, but I pushed forward anyway. I worked late nights in the campus computer lab, mastering design software until my eyes burned. I interned at firms that paid almost nothing, taking side jobs at coffee shops just to afford rent. I built a portfolio brick by brick, project by project, because I believed in something no one else did, me. But at home, it was different. Whenever I came back for holidays, my achievements were either ignored or dismissed. If Adam showed up, all eyes went to him. Laura could walk in with a new casserole recipe, and my mom would beam like she had discovered fire. Chloe just had to post a new selfie. And suddenly, the whole family was telling her how beautiful and talented she was. Me, I would quietly mention that one of my projects was featured in a student showcase, and my mom would roll her eyes. That's nice, Emily. But when are you going to get a real job? Something stable, something respectable. I wanted so badly for her to see me, to see the hours, the effort, the sacrifices I was making. But she couldn't, or maybe she refused. There were times I thought about quitting, times when the pressure of proving myself felt impossible. But every time I sat down in front of a blank page, I felt alive. Design wasn't just work to me, it was language. It was how I told stories when words failed me. By the time I graduated, I had already lined up my first few clients. Small projects, sure, but real money for real work. When I shared the news, my mother barely blinked. "That's fine," she said. "But how long until those clients disappear? You should think about applying for something at a bank, or maybe teaching. Something steady." That was the rhythm of my 20s, building a career that was blossoming while pretending, in front of my family, that it barely existed. I downplayed my wins because bragging would only invite criticism. I let them talk over me at dinners because arguing seemed pointless. I told myself I didn't need their approval, but deep down, I wanted it more than anything. And then came the moment that cut deeper than all the rest. One weekend, Laura hosted a gathering for her friends from the neighborhood. I stopped by to drop off a gift, thinking it would be a quick visit. I walked in, and there she was, standing in the living room, holding a design portfolio, my portfolio. She was flipping through pages of branding projects I had poured months into, and as her friends admired the work, she smiled and said, "Oh, it's just some things I've been dabbling in. Nothing serious." They clapped for her. They told her she was talented. They told her she should consider design as a side career. And my mother, standing beside her, nodded proudly. "Laura has always been so creative," she said. I stood frozen in the doorway, invisible in my own story, yet again. I kept telling myself that if I just worked harder, if I just built something undeniable, maybe my family would finally see me. And for a while, it seemed like that might be true. My studio grew. My designs were published in respected magazines. My client list went from mom-and-pop shops to regional brands, and eventually to companies with offices on both coasts. In New York, people called me successful. They trusted me with their vision, their money, their reputation. But in my family, none of that mattered. To them, I was still Emily, the girl with the sketchbook, the one who never quite fit. Outside of that toxic orbit, though, my life was full. I had Daniel, my partner, a talented architect with a calm, steady presence. He was the kind of man who listened without judgment, who celebrated every win like it was his own. And I had Maya, my best friend from college, the one who never sugar-coated anything. Where Daniel was gentle encouragement, Maya was blunt truth. Together, they reminded me I wasn't crazy for wanting respect. There was a moment, a real, life-changing moment, that could have taken me far from my family's shadow forever. A national retail brand approached me with an offer to open a second studio in Los Angeles. They promised bigger clients, bigger money, more visibility than I'd ever dreamed. It was the kind of opportunity young designers fantasize about. And I said no. Why? Because part of me still clung to the hope that staying closer to my family might finally earn their approval. I told myself it was about keeping roots in New York, about maintaining balance. But deep down, I was afraid that if I moved across the country, the small, fragile chance of them ever seeing me would vanish completely. It was the decision I regret the most. Looking back, I wonder, why did I sacrifice my dream for people who couldn't even clap for me? Why did I stay in a place where my success was invisible? Maybe you've done the same. Maybe you've turned down something incredible because you were still hoping to be enough for people who never valued you. If so, you know the ache. You know the endless waiting for recognition that never comes. Life kept moving. My business continued to grow. I hired a team, signed contracts worth more than I'd ever imagined, and bought a loft that I renovated into both home and workspace. I traveled with Daniel, hiked mountains, laughed with Maya over late-night takeout. By every measure, I was thriving. But the moment I crossed the threshold of my parents' house, it all evaporated. At Thanksgiving, Christmas, birthdays, none of it mattered. Adam's new promotion, Laura's kids, Chloe's latest adventure, those were the headlines. I was the footnote. Still, I kept showing up, gifts in hand, checks quietly written when the family couldn't quite manage an expense. I kept hoping, I kept bending, and every time I left a little smaller than when I walked in, until the year everything cracked open. It started with a phone call. My mother, her voice sugar sweet, but with that edge I knew too well. "Emily, the roof is leaking again. You know how expensive repairs can be. I told your father we should call you." I felt the familiar pull, the expectation that I would fix it, like I always did. But this time, something inside me whispered, "Not anymore." I wish I could say that phone call about the roof was the first time my family leaned on me, financially. But the truth is, by then, it had already become my unspoken role. I was the bank no one acknowledged, the invisible ATM with endless withdrawals. It started small. When my dad's car broke down, I wrote the check for repairs. When Chloe didn't have enough for tuition, I quietly wired the money. When Laura's kids needed expensive school supplies, I slipped her a gift card and told her it was just because. And Adam, well, Adam was a category all his own. His temporary cash flow issues somehow lasted years, each request larger than the last. At first, I didn't mind. I told myself this was what family did, that maybe, if I gave enough, they would finally see my worth. But the more I gave, the more they expected. Gratitude disappeared. A simple "thank you" was rare. Instead, it became framed as obligation. The least you can do after everything we did for you. I didn't argue. I just kept signing checks, transferring money, covering emergencies that weren't mine. Outwardly, my siblings lived glossy lives. Adam with his nice house, Laura with her picture-perfect family, Chloe bouncing between schools like she had endless second chances. But behind the curtain, it was me, always me. The weight of it grew heavier each year. I worked late nights, chased contracts, and reinvested every dollar back into my business, not just to build my future, but to carry theirs. And they never even realized. Then came the moment that broke something inside me. One afternoon, I received a call from my bank. A calm voice explained there had been unusual activity on a line of credit I supposedly opened months earlier. Confused, I insisted I had no such account. The representative hesitated before saying, "The paperwork has your name and signature on it." My stomach dropped. I asked for a copy. When the documents arrived, I sat frozen at my desk. There it was, my name, scrawled across contracts I had never seen. The account was real. The debt was real. But the signature wasn't. It was my mother's handwriting. I knew it instantly. The way she looped her E, the way she pressed too hard on the downstrokes. It was unmistakable. She had forged my signature. My own mother had signed my name to a loan, putting me on the hook for money I didn't even know existed. I wanted to scream, to confront her immediately, but all I could do was sit there, shaking. The betrayal was sharp, almost surreal. For years I had given willingly, and it hadn't been enough. Now she had stolen from me. I didn't tell anyone right away. Not Daniel, not Maya, not even the bank. I just carried the secret, terrified of the fallout. What would people say if they knew my own mother had done this? Who would believe me? She was the respectable matriarch, the woman who baked pies for church sales, who smiled for photos at every holiday. I was the daughter she had always painted as irresponsible, dramatic, unreliable. If I accused her, who would take my side? So I paid it. Quietly. I covered the debt that wasn't mine, just like I had covered everything else. And each time I looked in the mirror, I saw less of myself. That Christmas was coming, and I told myself it would be different. But deep down, I knew something was going to break. As Christmas drew closer, I promised myself I wouldn't let history repeat itself. I wasn't going to keep paying their bills, covering their mistakes, or swallowing my anger just to keep the peace. But the universe, or maybe my family, had other plans. 2 nights before Christmas, my phone buzzed. It was Adam. I almost didn't answer, but old habits die hard. And when I saw his name flash across the screen, I picked up. "M," he said, using the childhood nickname I hadn't heard in years. His voice was low, nervous. "I really hate to ask this, but I'm in trouble." I closed my eyes. Trouble? Always trouble. He went on to explain how his company was facing a temporary setback. Commissions delayed, bills piling up, creditors circling. He said if he didn't make a payment by the end of the year, foreclosure was a real possibility. His house, his wife, his kids, everything on the line. "I just need 20,000, he said, his voice cracking at the edges. "It'll buy me time until my next check comes in February. Please, Em, don't tell Mom and Dad. They think I'm doing great. I can't let them know." 20,000. It wasn't pocket change, even for me. That money was earmarked for expanding my studio, for hiring another designer, for investing in my future. I hesitated. My silence must have stretched too long because he jumped in again. "Emily, please, think of Diane. Think of the kids. Where will they go if we lose the house?" The guilt landed exactly where he wanted it to. He knew I couldn't stand the thought of innocent kids suffering for his bad decisions. So I said what I had said 100 times before. "I'll transfer it." The second I hung up, I regretted it. My chest ached with anger. Not just at him, but at myself for falling into the same trap again. I called Maya, needing to hear her blunt honesty. She didn't disappoint. "You have got to stop being their ATM," she said flatly. "He's a grown man. If he made bad choices, that's his mess to clean up, not yours." "I know," I muttered, pacing my living room. "But if they lost the house—" She cut me off. "Funny you should say that, because I saw your brother 2 days ago, at 5th Avenue, in a luxury watch boutique." I stopped in my tracks. "What?" "He wasn't stressed, Em. He wasn't panicked. He was smiling, and he bought himself a watch. Not just any watch, one of those limited edition pieces that cost more than my car." My stomach twisted. "Are you sure?" "I watched him swipe his card," she said. "So yeah, I'm sure." The betrayal hit like a punch. $20,000 for a man who claimed his family was about to be homeless, while he was out buying jewelry for his wrist. "I told you," Maya said, her voice softer now. "They take advantage because you let them. And until you stop, nothing will change." Her words echoed long after I hung up. I thought about all the times I had bailed Adam out, all the times I had covered my mother's emergencies, all the years I had carried a family that pretended I didn't exist. Something inside me shifted that night. For the first time, I wasn't just angry. I was done. Christmas was coming, and I knew one thing for certain. This year, I wasn't going to sit quietly at the end of the table. Christmas Day arrived, and I walked into my parents' house with a different kind of resolve. My arms were full of carefully wrapped gifts, my hair and makeup professionally done, my dress chosen not to blend in, but to stand out. I wasn't there to play the invisible daughter anymore. The house looked exactly the same as it had every Christmas of my life. Lights strung across the roof, a wreath on the front door, the smell of turkey drifting from the kitchen. But I wasn't the same. As I set the presents under the tree, I felt like I was setting down years of silent resentment, tied up in ribbon. Dinner started the way it always did. Adam bragging about new business ventures, Laura beaming about her children, Chloe scrolling on her phone until someone asked her a question. My father sat at one end of the table, my mother at the other, orchestrating the flow of conversation like a conductor. And me, I was at the far end, listening, waiting. I tried to share small pieces of my life. When I mentioned a new client, my mother waved it away. When I talked about a feature in a design magazine, she changed the subject to Laura's latest PTA fundraiser. It was all too familiar. But this time, instead of shrinking, I took a sip of wine and reminded myself, not tonight. Then it happened. Dessert plates had just been set down when my mother leaned forward, her eyes fixed on me. Her voice carried that razor edge I knew too well. Let's be honest, Emily. You've always been different, off in your own little world. And what do you have to show for it? No husband, no children, just some clients who could replace you tomorrow. You are the most useless child we have. The room went silent. Adam looked at his plate. Laura froze, fork in midair. Chloe finally looked up from her phone, wide-eyed. My father half rose, as if to speak, but no words came. I pushed my chair back, the scrape of wood on hardwood echoing through the room. My napkin fell to the floor. I stood tall, meeting my mother's stare. My voice didn't shake. Then stop calling me when you need money. Her face drained of color. My siblings shifted uncomfortably. Diane, Adam's wife, stared at him in shock. Money, she asked. I didn't stop. Years of silence broke all at once. I told them about the tuition I'd paid for Chloe, about the endless loans to Adam, $20,000 just last week, about the roof, the appliances, even Dad's medical bills. And then I turned to my mother. Or should I mention the line of credit you opened in my name? The one you forged my signature for? Gasps rippled around the table. My mother's mask cracked, just for a moment. My father's eyes went wide. Nancy, is that true? She tried to recover, stammering, but the room was already unraveling. Adam's wife demanded answers. Laura looked at me, guilt flashing across her face. Chloe whispered, "You paid for me?" I took a deep breath. I'm not your bank. I'm not your scapegoat. I built a business that employs people, that generates more money than any of you realize. And I'm done hiding it. And then, Daniel, quiet until now, set down his glass. His voice was calm, but firm. What Emily hasn't told you, he said, is that we just bought a new house. 3,000 square feet, fully paid for. Because she's not useless. She's extraordinary. The silence that followed was heavier than any I'd ever known. For once, no one could dismiss me. I walked out of that dining room with my heart pounding so loudly I thought it might break through my chest. My mother's face was pale, My father sat frozen. My siblings were whispering frantically among themselves, and Daniel followed me quietly, his steady presence like an anchor. For once, I hadn't shrunk. I hadn't swallowed my words. I had spoken them, sharp and clear, and left them hanging in the air where no one could deny them. Outside, the December night bit into my skin, but I felt strangely warm. For the first time in my life, I wasn't carrying their silence, their dismissal, their endless taking. I was carrying my own truth, and it felt lighter than I ever imagined. The fallout came quickly. My phone lit up with missed calls and messages before I even pulled out of the driveway. Chloe's text came first, her words tumbling over themselves in apology. "I didn't know you helped me. I didn't know Mom lied. Please don't hate me. I'm so sorry." Then Laura, her message quieter but heavy with guilt. "I never realized how much I took for granted. I wish I had been a better sister." Adam's call came hours later, his voice frantic. "Em, we need to talk. Diane is furious. She wants to know if everything you said was true." I didn't comfort him. I didn't reassure. I simply said, "Yes, Adam. Every word was true. Maybe it's time you face it." And then I hung up. But the most unexpected message was from my father. A simple text. "I'm proud of you. I should have said it years ago." The days that followed were messy. My mother refused to acknowledge what had happened. She called me dramatic, selfish, ungrateful, but something in her voice was different. Less confident, more strained, as if even she knew the facade had cracked. For the first time, people weren't protecting her narrative. They were questioning it. Weeks later, I agreed to meet Laura for coffee. She arrived, looking nervous, clutching a scarf like it might shield her from shame. "I was wrong," she admitted. "I let Mom's voice become my own, and I compared myself to you in ways that weren't fair. You didn't deserve that. You never did." For once, she listened instead of talking over me. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Chloe showed up at my studio a month later, eyes red from crying, and asked to see my work. She stayed for hours, flipping through designs, asking questions, finally seeing me for who I really was. "You're amazing, Em," she whispered. "I want to be more like you." Hearing that from the baby sister, who had always been shielded from reality, felt like balm on an old wound. Adam, that took longer. His pride was bruised, his lies exposed, but even he began to shift. A bank transfer came one morning, $5,000, the first repayment he had ever attempted. It wasn't much compared to what he owed, but it was acknowledgement. And acknowledgement was more valuable than the money itself. My father surprised me, most of all. He started showing up, at my studio, at design events, even inviting Daniel and me to dinner on his own. For years, he had been silent in the face of my mother's cruelty. Now, he was trying to find his voice. It was late, but it was real. And me, I felt free. Not because everything was fixed. Far from it. My mother still resisted, still denied, still tried to twist the story. But I no longer needed her approval to feel whole. I no longer defined myself by the family roles she had written for us. I had stepped off her stage and built my own. The greatest lesson I carried from that night was this: sometimes you have to let things shatter before they can be rebuilt. Sometimes the bravest act isn't forgiving silently, but speaking loudly enough that the truth can no longer be ignored. Family isn't about who drains you the most. It's about who shows up, who listens, who grows with you. And sometimes, family isn't the people you were born into at all. It's the people you choose, the ones who see you, love you, and walk beside you without asking you to shrink. So I ask you, have you ever been called useless by the very people you loved, what did you do in that moment? Did you stay silent, or did you find your voice? Because here's what I learned that Christmas. When you stop trying to earn love through silence and sacrifice, you finally create space for something better. Real love, real respect, real freedom. And that, more than anything, is the gift I gave myself.